It's another beautiful Sunday afternoon. This is Robin Minds. Welcome. My name is Ebu Kawabuchi. Thanks a lot for joining us. We're in the second or third week, is it, of the life of the new administration. Still looking forward to the 12th of June, which is Democracy Day. We do hear that we might be getting a speech on that day from Mr. President telling us about the plans for the second term in office, celebrating democracy, and of course, hopefully, hearing soon enough about the formation of a government. The last time we do know it took about 6 months before a government was formed. Cabinet was announced. We're hoping that it takes probably shorter than that this time, and looking forward to the president and his team hitting the ground running. But it's been a week full of politics, full of a lot of talk about fake news and all of that. We're going to be delving into that in particular to find out why fake news, which started out as a term, I believe, somewhere in the United States with the current president and has now become a worldwide phenomenon, why it is now a thing and seems to be a mainstay and a part of our conversation here in Nigeria. I have here with me Hannah Jakaye and Joshua Ajayi to help me talk about this. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't mention there, it was during the elections, I think, in the United States, we heard President Trump talk about, fake news a lot. People laughed about the term. It's now a thing. We hear people in government around the world talk about it. And especially in our elections this year, I think was the one time I know that Nigerians, it became a part of our conversation. There was a WhatsApp broadcast every day. There was a tweet every day. Most times we check the link and it's just, it's unfounded. But it's a part of our conversation. Now, how did we get here?
Yeah, like you said, starting from the Trump era when the term fake news became sort of weaponized. And people thought, okay, it's happening in the United States, but you find out it's also happening in everywhere in the world. And for countries like Nigeria with big democracies, like we are the biggest democracy in Africa, and you have politics, so people setting their propaganda, each person with their own agenda. So it has become a thing. And one other thing why we are here is because in the country at the moment, there is a growing internet penetration, and you have a lot of young people coming online. We have the youth population is also there. They have access to smartphone, even the older population. And these days whereby people no longer get their information from the credible media, the big names that we know. Like information is it's everywhere. You have blogs and everybody pushing news and information out there. And many young people, especially since they form the majority of the population, would rather get their information from their phones. And sometimes you cannot really verify the source of this information. Yeah. And the fact that fact-checking is not much of a culture, like we're just trying to build that into the consciousness of people that you don't take the information that you see at face value. Yeah. Always verify before you share.
That's a message that needs to be spreading, but it doesn't seem to be going around enough. I know how many times I've cautioned people on social media that say, you need to check this before you send it to me, because you can't just send a broadcast to the 5,000 people on your phone and expect everybody to believe it, or you don't believe everything you receive. Why is fact-checking not a thing yet? Especially maybe I don't even think it's a generational thing, because we also have some of our parents who tend to send these things to us as well. Why is it not a part of the culture as well?
I think it's born out of the fact that a whole lot of us don't have a good sense of responsibility. And also, if you realize the fact that there's no consequences to some things, then people would naturally do things, without any form of control and without any form. When there's no regulation, you realize people just want to do things, at their own convenience, not minding the consequences or the implications of whatever they are doing. If you're sharing information, you realize that some of the information that goes out there have some kind of negative impact on some group of people, on an individual, on probably even government policies, government projects, and all of that. So if we have a sense of responsibility to know the impact of some of the things that we share, then I think a whole lot of us will be more responsible. And like she said, check facts before we broadcast them, before we share them.
But is it easy to check facts, though? Because I know people have said, if I get a broadcast, for example, and it says something is happening in, I don't know, Anambra State or Maiduguri, I'm in Lagos. I may not necessarily be able to go, I'll make these phone calls. How easy is it to actually check these facts? How do you check facts?
I think it's quite easy. You can do it on your phone. You have, these days, you can verify your images. When someone these days you have doctored images. So when you're on Google, it's Google reverse image search. keen eye. There are tools that you can use to verify images like instantly on your phone. And sometimes in cases where you have WhatsApp message and the rest, just check the source of the message. And usually when you have a situation of someone telling you something on WhatsApp, maybe there's a crisis somewhere or the rest, type it on Google, check what are the credible news media, what are they saying about it. So if they're not saying it, if they're not saying anything about it, there's a probability that that news is not genuine.
Yeah. Do you think politics has made it worse? I know we've had a lot of, it's not a new thing, this fake news issue. I mean, we've had brands in the past where we hear, oh, a brand in particular is poisonous, and people spread the news like wildfire. People avoid the brand. It happened with Ebola as well, where they said, oh, if you want to get cured of Ebola, drink salt and water. People were drinking and getting other diseases or getting other, sort of infections from that as well. But has politics made it even crazier now?
I think one thing that we need to even look at here is to look at the fact that fake news didn't just start today. Now, if you look at this publicist of Adolf Hitler, he kept on using fake news to actually push.
They just called it propaganda then.
Propaganda then and all of that. But now we have to use a more structured name based on the effect that this has right now. So politics has always had used hate speeches, to drive narratives, in terms of whether the government in power or the people in opposition. So that has always been there. And if you look at the time of Adolf Hitler, that's a long, decades ago, so it's always been a tool used in politics. Like you said, it was called propaganda. But right now, we are finding even a more suitable name for it. In public relations parlance, they use propaganda, which could actually be a tilted news. It could be fabricated. It could be manipulated.
Or exaggerated.
Or exaggerated.
Yeah. You've talked regulation there and talked about hate speech. We'll get to hate speech now, but I want to talk about regulation now, because it's a very thin line. We've had some countries, even on the continent, I think it's Uganda, for example, and Tanzania as well, have come up with certain laws where, the internet is sort of regulated. You can't post certain things. There's fines and all. Is it easy to do that on the internet? And I can find that a lot of countries have still not found a way around it. Traditional media is regulated.
Yeah.
But social media is still sort of a hard nut to crack. And it's a very thin line between regulating it and sort of stifling free speech. So how do we go about that?
Yeah, like you said, because social media, it's a phenomenon that we are still trying to understand. So regulating it could be dicey, because if you are regulating, to what extent you hope you don't get to an extent whereby you start limiting people, like limiting the expression of free speech, limiting human rights, and it could get to a stage whereby people are not just regulating, but they are trying to silence criticism.
Yeah.
So that is quite dicey. It's quite a situation. But in our context, looking at the Nigerian context, I think what we need to do, apart from regulating, is to have a situation whereby the right information is out there. The way it is now, our government is not really open. And when you have a scenario where people don't have the right information, then it gives room to rumor. Like, people can fabricate news and put it out there because they don't even get credible information from the government. So apart from trying to regulate, one other way that I think we can regulate is to ensure that you have the proper information out there. Government needs to be more open. People need to know. When you get the right information from the right source, then it leaves less chances for some people to just sit down in the corner of their rooms and fabricate stuff and push it out there.
Yeah, but what if you still have political opponents? As much as you want to be open as a government, you find that sometimes some of this fabricated news come from people who are either trying to pull you down. America has a very open government. We've seen it was a big factor in the Indian elections as well. So I guess my question is more about responsibility of people who do this, and how do we get to, find them and regulate them better. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Okay, yes. Yeah. Well, I think to a great extent, if there are laws in place and there is there's a measure of punishment to the spread of fake news. In other words, if you know that this has an implication, if you spread it, if it's not true, that puts a sense of responsibility on everyone to check the authenticity of the information they are sharing before they share it. So I think to a great extent, one, the government can, has a role to play in this, in terms of enacting laws that brings about some kind of consequences for people who spread fake news. So if there are consequences, then everyone is on guard to ensure that they are not the promoters of fake news. But if there is no consequence, like they say, in a city where there is no law, then there are no offenses. So if there are consequences for spreading fake news.
So is it all fake news that should be sort of have consequences now?
Okay. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Because
Yes.
there are people that will tell you, okay, if it's fake news that is just harmless, that it's playful, at what point do you? Okay. Sometimes there's something we call on social media banter. You know, you're just having fun. You're just. Where do you draw the line? Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, because sometimes people share this news and they don't know it's fake.
Yes.
Like
I guess that's also what he's saying. You have to verify whether you know or not. Yeah. So I guess my point is, where do you draw the line? Is it every fake news? What is really fake news?
Okay.
Do you understand? If I tweet this morning, I'm like, oh, I'm wearing a green suit on the show today, but I'm not wearing a green suit. It's fake news, quote unquote. Are you going to now arrest me? Do you know what I'm saying? Where do you draw the line? Because
I think anything that has like an effect on the public interest, like if it has to do with you personally, that's a business. But something that has an effect, that can affect the public interest, that can incite violence, that can incite fear, that can change the judgment of people towards a phenomenon. So that is what we should be regulating.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think in a country like Germany, there is some level of regulation. And there are rules in terms of the areas that this cuts across. That cuts across health, security, electoral process, and all of that. So if you spread any news that can affect, eat up the polity, or even more like cause some negative impact in the society that is not true, then I think those are the things, those are the issues, those are the areas, because like you said, we need to really spell it out, because people sometimes just want to play around things. But I think that will also then put on everyone a kind of sense of responsibility that you mind what you share. If it's not true, then you need to be careful the kind of information that you share out there.
Who has more of a responsibility here now? We've talked about government a lot, but what about the social media platforms? How much of a responsibility do they have? Because I know that with the American elections in particular, Facebook came under a lot of fire. They've pulled down a lot of accounts that were linked to certain countries. So do they hold more of a responsibility, the social media platforms, the WhatsApps, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, much more than government regulating them?
Yes, especially in the context for developing countries. Technology is a phenomenon and we can't really say we are understanding it. It's not something that we have the full grasp of. Like there's been happening now, there's been a lot of fire on this social media founders, the giant Facebook and the rest. I know they've been doing something like they've been doing, I won't really say they've been doing a lot. You have Facebook partnering with some newsroom to flag that information and put the right information out there. You have YouTube closing down accounts, but we need to see more action. We need to see more effort. Like the other time with Facebook, they still allow people with political context. It's just out there, no regulation and the rest, because they still want to make money when it comes to adverts and the rest. So we need them, and there's this thing about algorithm that Facebook uses in monitoring the kind of information that you see. So they still need to do more in that respect, and I think the attention should be on them and not just the government alone.
Do you agree?
Yes, definitely. I think it's more of a public-private partnership thing that is going to really help. Regarding this, in a country like Germany, for instance, even Facebook was, I think, fined like 50 million euros for a particular news or something. Now there is a law that they have that if your attention is being called to a particular news that is fake and you don't take it down on time, there is a fine to that. So that brings some kind of self-regulation, self-censorship of news content on your platform. So social media platforms, they have that responsibility. The government also have a responsibility, and if we are including traditional media, the media generally has a responsibility to ensure they engage in self-censorship, self-regulation, which will help sanitize the space. And that, in its sense, will also help engender some kind of belief in the media more, because if you are not sure that the information you're getting from platforms are authentic, then you realize that there is a kind of reduction in the belief in the media. And the media has an agenda setting role for the society as the fourth estate of the realm. So they have this sense, this responsibility to ensure that there is some level of self-regulation, self-censorship, and even as an association, media platforms, they also need to ensure that there are even some kind of sanction on some of their contemporaries who engage in some of these, who engage in propagating fake news. You know, so if there is industry regulation, there is self-regulation, and there is self-regulation, you realize that, there'll be a lot more sanity in the space.
Yeah. I want to quickly touch on hate speech before we go now, because it became a huge part of the conversation this last week, you know, and what actually constitutes hate speech. You know, there are people, there's satire, there's satire, there's, you know, is every criticism supposed to be termed as hate speech? Where does something or a conversation become hate speech? At what point do we cross the line? Do you know?
Okay. Yeah, like, let me just take it from every criticism should not be hate speech. Like, if you criticize concisely and you have your point and you have your evidence. When you're talking about hate speech, you're looking at a speech whereby, you know, it touches on identifiers such as race and gender, people's race on tribe, and it incites violence. So if you have someone talking and is not inciting violence, it is not hate speech.
So if I say something like Nigeria is annoying, would that be hate speech?
No, it is not.
You wouldn't term that hate speech?
No, it is not.
Would you term that hate speech?
No, definitely.
You don't think you think that would incite some people, for example,
no,
who are very patriotic?
That is unpatriotic, but
not necessarily hate speech.
It is not necessarily hate speech, because it should not be, you know, you should not get to a point whereby people can express their mind.
Yeah.
So it is not, since it's not inciting violence.
Yeah. On the final note, now you've talked about regulation a lot now, and there's a lot of people who are worried. You know, we've seen, like I mentioned, a few African countries where it's gotten a little overboard. You know, we have censorship in China, in UAE, some countries where you can access certain websites by law. You know, there's the fear that, you know, we talk about regulation a lot and we start slipping into that. Are you worried about that?
I didn't get that first.
About us, you know, when we talk about regulation and then government starts regulating social media and then there's complete censorship, you know, there's a fear that, like we've talked about free speech as well, where it starts eroding completely. Are you worried about that?
I am not really worried about that, because I think it's, instilling sense of responsibility in our people to engender peace in the society. I think it's not something bad. However, that should not be done to the extreme where freedom of speech is being tampered with. However, there is a need to ensure that there is some level of regulation that would bring about sanity within the space that will help us curtail hate speeches and, of course, fake news.
Yeah. What about you?
I think I am worried.
Okay.
From the examples that we've seen, from the instances that we've seen of governments climbing down media houses and the rest, we cannot trust our government to work within the ambit of those regulations. You know, you have governments playing politics with everything in this part of the country. So regulation on the part of the government is something that we should be worried about, because we know people always go overboard in this part of the country. There is a limit between trying to regulate and trying to stifle people's opinion or working against the opposition.
So the line has to be very clear.
So the line has to be very clear.
All right, we need to go.
Okay.
We'll continue this conversation. I mean, it's always an ongoing conversation. Thanks a lot for being here today, Joshua and Hannah.
Thank
very
you.
good conversation with us.